live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, September 4th, Labor Day, September 4th, 2017. Welcome to it. Are you taking the day off? Did you get the day off? I got the day off. Surprise, everybody. This is a pre-recorded program. I don't mean to disappoint you, but I thought it would be nice if we took Labor Day off in honor of all the hardworking folks, as opposed to me, who gets to sit here and talk it up every morning. I enjoy what I do, and I wouldn't exactly call it labor. But nonetheless, the fam's at home, and it makes it for a difficult time broadcasting in the morning. And hey, who doesn't like to sleep in when you get a chance and maybe have a nice breakfast with the family? Let's all do that. Let's all turn off the show. Just kidding. And, well, you could do it. You could go and listen to the podcast. How about that? You'll be pretty up to date, too. You won't miss out on too much. I do have this news, Sunday night news. They will no doubt all be talking about this in the morning, unless, of course, there's a nuclear war with Korea in between then and now. But Politico has the story late Sunday evening that Donald Trump is a gigantic jackass. And he's decided to end DACA, as he says, with a 6-month delay. Now, nobody's entirely sure what that means. I mean, there's no difference between you and Donald Trump in that sense. I don't think he has any idea what it means. He may be trying to make it look like he's softening the blow somehow. I really don't know what he thinks he's up to on this. I look at it this way. He could drop dead inside of 6 months. So there's that. I mean, I guess we'll take the Friedman unit, but I don't really know what he means by a delayed implementation. So who even knows? Besides which, it's already a nightmare for everybody. So I'm not certain that dragging it out 6 months does any good, but I'll take any delay we can get in anything that's disastrous like this. You never know. I mean, all the delay that we got on the health care bill ended up, I think, sort of kind of killing the thing. New announcements on that front, by the way. We can add that to our pile of updates. But here's the news from Politico. They were the first ones out, and very likely there's more digestion of the story available early this morning. But let's go to the Politico report of last night. Trump has decided to end DACA with 6-month delay. President Donald Trump, I can't believe I just read that. President Donald Trump has decided to end the Obama-era program that grants work permits to undocumented immigrants who arrived in the country as children, according to two sources familiar with his thinking. Oh, who could that possibly be? There's thinking happening? Senior White House aides huddled Sunday afternoon to discuss the rollout of a decision likely to ignite a political firestorm and fulfill one of the president's corpse campaign promises, I should probably call it. Trump has wrestled for months, really, over whether to do away with the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, known as DACA. He has faced strong warnings from members of his own party not to scrap the program and struggled with his own misgivings about targeting minors for deportation. Conversations with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, can't believe I just read that, who argued that Congress, rather than the executive branch, is responsible for writing immigration law, helped persuade the president to terminate the program, the two sources said, though White House aides caution that, as with everything in the Trump White House, nothing is set in stone until an official announcement has been made, and who knows how he's even going to make that. In a nod to reservations held by many lawmakers, the White House plans to delay the enforcement of the president's decision for 6 months, giving Congress a window to act, according to one White House official. But a senior White House aide said the Chief of Staff John Kelly, who has been running the West Wing policy process on the issue, thinks Congress should have gotten its act together a lot longer ago. Well, that's true. He's not wrong there. Trademark. Trump is expected to announce his decision on Tuesday, because he's going to sleep late today, probably. And the White House informed House Speaker Paul Ryan of the president's decision on Sunday morning, according to a source close to the administration. Ryan had said during a radio interview on Friday that he didn't think the president should terminate DACA and that Congress should act on the issue. Neither the White House nor a spokesman for Ryan immediately responded to requests for comment. The president's expected announcement is likely to shore up his base, which rallied behind his broader campaign message about the importance of enforcing the country's immigration laws and securing the border. At the same time, the president's decision is likely to be one of the most contentious of his early administration, opposed by leaders of both parties and by the political establishment more broadly. The White House and Congress have tried to pass the issue off on each other, with each arguing that the other is responsible for determining the fate of approximately 800,000 undocumented immigrants who are benefiting from DACA. Though most Republicans believe that rolling back DACA is a solid legal decision, they are conscious of the difficult emotional terrain, really. Someone must have slipped that into their morning television routine or something. Utah Senator Orrin Hatch joined Ryan in cautioning Trump against rolling back the program. The president is likely to couch his decision in legalese, by which we mean he won't understand what he's reading. Many on the right, even those who support protections for children brought into the country illegally through no fault of their own, argue that DACA is unconstitutional because former President Barack Obama carried it out unilaterally instead of working through Congress. Some Republican lawmakers, including Florida Senator Marco Rubio, have said that Congress needs to pass a law to protect the so-called dreamers. My hope is that as part of this process, we can work on a way to deal with this issue and solve it through legislation, which is the right way to do it and the constitutional way to do it, Rubio told CNN in June. Trump's expected decision to scrap DACA represents another challenge for Ryan and fellow congressional Democrats who are facing an end-of-September deadline to avert a government shutdown and government debt default, while also tackling a Hurricane Harvey relief package and a major tax reform push. Good effing luck, you idiots. So there's a lot going on now that it is September and the work period for Congress begins again. One of the things that made at least small waves over the weekend was the announcement by the Senate parliamentarian that she would be ruling that the opportunity for Republicans to use reconciliation for repeal of the Affordable Care Act, they're still thinking about that, but that the reconciliation instructions relevant to that were going to be deemed to have expired at the end of September with the finish of the fiscal year. And Greg sent me some news about that. I have my doubts about the interpretation generally of when reconciliation instructions actually expire, but it's the sort of thing that could certainly change based on the language of the reconciliation instructions, the language used in the budget resolution to set out those instructions. In addition to which, of course, longtime listeners to the show will know that we did a pretty in-depth inquiry into those instructions. And, well, there's not a goddamn part of them that means a thing, basically. I mean, all parts of the reconciliation instructions were pretty much thrown out the window as far as I'm concerned. So the idea that you would be a hardliner in deciding based on, I don't even know what, that the reconciliation instructions would expire at the end of September. I mean, great. I'm glad it will make things difficult for them. I just don't know what the basis of the decision is. I don't know whether, and it wouldn't be just, well, that's tradition. I mean, there's probably a rule somewhere or there's precedent somewhere, but it's not entirely clear. And I have no idea why they shouldn't be able to act on instructions in a budget resolution that they haven't used yet. And so long as the Congress that passed it is still in session, I don't think it's a real problem. At the end of the second session, at adjournment sine die, when all unpassed bills die, I could see where that would expire the reconciliation instructions. But whatever. I'm not going to help them to do this. And I don't think it represents a huge obstacle. I think we're still many of us laboring, not here on this show, laboring under the misunderstanding that reconciliation as a procedure can only be used once a year. That is, that there could only be one reconciliation bill passed. And of course, even if that were the interpretation, why it couldn't be an omnibus reconciliation bill that deals with instructions on several subjects, I have no idea. So, for instance, this news was greeted with some enthusiasm by, of course, Affordable Care Act fans. That would be everybody in the country, pretty much, when you get right down to it. But it was greeted with excitement because, one, the reconciliation instructions were going to expire, and Congress is extraordinarily busy during the next couple of weeks, and they only have 13 working days in September to get this stuff done anyway. So it was unlikely they were going to be able to use the old reconciliation instructions to try again to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And because of their announced intention to use the reconciliation process for tax reform, whatever that might be, people came under the impression that that meant that Affordable Care Act repeal was off the table for next year under reconciliation too. Now, it might be off the table for political reasons, but there's no particular reason why it should be taken off the table because of reconciliation or any limitations on reconciliation. There's no reason why they couldn't pass a budget resolution that instructs the relevant committees to undertake both tax reform and repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And then you could simply have all the relevant committees do their work and report to the Budget Committee, and the Budget Committee would report out an omnibus reconciliation bill that both repeals the Affordable Care Act and implements tax reform. Except, one, Republicans at heart aren't ready to repeal the Affordable Care Act because it's well-liked and effective, and it will murder them at the polls if they go ahead and do it, and that's why they balked the first time. And two, there's no tax reform plan, and these idiots aren't likely to come up with one, honestly, that even needs reconciliation. To be quite honest, I don't think it's even going to become an issue. But I guess they would want to do it so that it wouldn't, I don't think it would require reconciliation to get the job done. It just requires reconciliation to get around the filibuster. But ultimately, their tax reform is, well, we're going to cut the rates for high earners, and that's it. I don't think we have anything particularly complicated here. So anyway, I don't think that protects us a great deal, but I don't want to get anybody depressed here. Let's see. Greg had sent me a tweet from Andy Slavitt. Let's open this thing up and take a look at it and start by asking, who's Andy Slavitt? Andy Slavitt ran Medicare and Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act for President Obama. That's what he says right in his Twitter bio, so you know it's true. Well, he does a number of other things now because he doesn't do that anymore because Obama isn't president. But he sent this out, what was this date? Oh, Friday. In Friday afternoon, very big news. He says, Senate has 30 days left to repeal ACA on a partisan basis this go-round. And that's the key part there, this go-round. There could be another one, is what I'm saying. This tweet included a press release from Bernie Sanders, who is the ranking member on the Senate Budget Committee. And it says this: parliamentarian determines reconciliation instructions expire September 30th. Which, by the way, one, that was something that a lot of people argued anyway, and of course I argued against. But two, the fact that you would have to phrase your release that the parliamentarian has determined that reconciliation instructions expire on September 30th means that there was some question. If it was simply always the case that they expired at the end of the fiscal year, there would be, one, no reason to have waited on the edge of our seat for the parliamentarian to have said anything, and two, no reason for press releases announcing that we have sat on the edge of our seats for nothing. Anyway, here's the press release. Bernie Sanders, ranking member on the Budget Committee, released the following statement after the Senate parliamentarian determined that the reconciliation instructions to repeal the Affordable Care Act expire at the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. Today's determination by the Senate parliamentarian is a major victory for the American people and everyone who fought against President Trump's attempt to take away health care from up to 32 million people. Now that the parliamentarian has determined that the Senate Republicans cannot use reconciliation instructions to repeal the Affordable Care Act beyond this fiscal year, be careful. We need to work together to expand, not cut, health care for millions of Americans who desperately need it. Well, I'd be careful about that one. Like I said, there's no reason why they can't come back with reconciliation instructions to repeal the Affordable Care Act next year. In fact, I would say they'll probably just take the same language and repeat it. Although, honestly, I would look to tweak the language after, why am I giving them any hints? But if it was us, I'd be talking to the parliamentarian and I'd say, you got to explain to me why you think these instructions expire and whether there's anything that we could put in the budget resolution language that would make them last longer. Now, the answer this time is no, because at the end of, by the end of the next fiscal year, they'll still be in session, so they could make it last longer. They could get it from September 30th, October 1st, through whenever they adjourn sine die, like in December. You could buy yourself a little extra time. But I think, like I said, the fact that everyone is expressing their marvel at this decision having been made tells you what you need to know. It wasn't an automatic thing, and it was mistakenly assumed to be such. And, well, what can you do? Who cares? Practically speaking, is the practical implications are all anybody is really interested in, I'm sure. But we papers, particular attention to procedure here. It's a weakness. What can I tell you? All right. So let's see. What other things happened over the weekend that require updating? There's lots of really interesting tiny stories. There's some big overarching stories. Should probably use today's show, since we're taping it ahead of time, to dig back, dig a little deeper and put together a slightly more interesting narrative for the day. Here's one of the little throwaway stories that I just thought was kind of fun. It's in The Hill, and I know everybody says, I got to stop reading The Hill, but they're little tweets with their pictures. They're just so tempting. And you couldn't pass this one up. This based on a quote from Matt Damon, I guess. This is just fun. Matt Damon, the actor, yes. Directors had to write Trump apart to shoot movies in his buildings. Brandon Carter writes this one. I just thought this was funny. It was illustrated, the tweet was illustrated with a screen cap from the, like Home Alone 2. Donald Trump is wandering through his stupid building in New York. The big golden stupid one, Trump Tower. And Macaulay Culkin, I guess, is lost in New York. Wasn't that the subtitle of Home Alone 2? He's not home, though. But okay. Well, anyway, the real point isn't that whether he's home or not. He's lost in New York. That's the key point. And I guess he wanders into Trump Tower and he runs into Donald Trump, and they have a stupid interaction of some kind. And I don't even know. I don't know. I think I've seen on YouTube the clip. Who cares? It's dumb, right? Why is it dumb? Here's the answer. Actor Matt Damon on Friday railed against President Trump's abhorrent comments following the violence at the white supremacist rally in Virginia, and told behind-the-scenes story about filming movies at Trump Organization buildings. This is the fun part. The deal was, he says, that if you wanted to shoot in one of his buildings, you had to write him in apart. What a jackass. Can you believe this? That's what Damon said. Damon's not the jackass. It's Donald Trump. Damon said in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Martin Brest had to write something in Scent of a Woman, and the whole crew was in on it. You have to waste an hour of your day with a BS shot. Donald Trump walks in, and Al Pacino's like, hello, Mr. Trump. You had to call him by name. And then he exits. You waste a little time so you can get the permit, but then you can cut the scene out, Damon said. But I guess in Home Alone 2, they left it in. Damon, promoting his new movie, which you have to say his name in the movie, I think. Anyway, also said he was very concerned about the state of things in the U.S. Thank you very much for noticing. And praised Special Counsel Robert Mueller for defending institutions against Trump's attacks. Hopefully his investigation is going smoothly, Damon said. He can't wrap things up soon enough as far as I'm concerned. Well, we share that concern. Damon also said Trump's comments following the violence in Charlottesville were absolutely abhorrent, according to Entertainment Weekly. To see these young, aggrieved white boys walking with their torches and screaming, "Jews will not replace us," it was just shocking, Damon said. Then, the night that the president made his many sides comments was absolutely abhorrent. Damon has criticized Trump in the past, and he donated to Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton during the 2016 elections. It's extremely important that you know that, because otherwise you might think that writing a stupid line where you have to say, "Hello, Mr. Trump," for no friggin' reason whatsoever in a movie, because the guy wants to be, for a guy who hates Hollywood, he can't stand being left out of any Hollywood movies. It's important that we say that, because otherwise you might think he was biased for no particular reason. Whereas now we have to declare him, oh, well, you see, he's a Democrat, not a filmmaker who had to deal with an annoying jackass property owner and do something so stupid and wasteful just to placate the guy's enormous ego. That could never happen to a Republican, right? Okay. Well, anyway, I just thought that one was kind of interesting, and that I would share it with you. And I was right. I did share it with you. See? I knew I was right. Here's another interesting, possibly dumb piece, but this is part of an overall theme. I'm not going to take up the theme just yet, but we may have to return to it. You've seen this in the news, the whole idea of John Kelly coming in and taking over as chief of staff and riding herd on Trump. We're going to have to touch on more about that, but because I've got a New York Times piece that's really kind of astounding about it. I shouldn't have shortchanged it yet, but you've likely read it. I'm going to go over it a little bit too, because there's some pieces on it that I really wanted to pull out. But here's an additional tidbit on top of all that. In addition to what will we say about this? Having his running battle with the president himself, who hired him to do this job, to please give us some control, make us look good to the establishment. He can't stand it. And they're grating on one another. And, well, you'll hear from the New York Times thing, some incredible interaction between the two of them. It's not just him. And, Bannon, I'm sure they didn't get along, but he's at least gone. Who knows whether he gets along with Miller or not. But this one wasn't a surprise exactly, but it was worth a chuckle. The Daily Beast reporting this one. Lachlan Markay and Aswan Subsang. I never did get the hang of his name, and I should probably work that one out. John Kelly pushing out Omarosa for triggering Trump. You gotta love that, right? The new chief of staff is trying to cure the chaos that infected the West Wing, and Omarosa is patient zero for unfettered access to the boss. Wow. He never did fix that, huh? Newly minted White House Chief of Staff John Kelly has sought to put a dent in the influence of one of President Donald Trump's most famous advisors, Omarosa Manigault. Amazing. The former Apprentice co-star, that's a big promotion, co-star, who currently serves as the communications director for the Office of Public Liaison, has seen her direct access to the president limited since Kelly took the top White House job in late July. Sources tell the Daily Beast, that was the end of the sentence. Wow. Sources tell the Daily Beast, period. You see, that's how these things work. In particular, Kelly has taken steps to prevent her and other senior staffers from getting unvetted news articles on the president's Resolute desk, a key method for influencing the president's thinking, and one that Manigault used to rile up Trump about internal White House drama. Multiple sources in and outside the Trump White House told the Daily Beast that, until recently, it was common practice for aides to slide into the Oval Office and distract and infuriate the president with pieces of negative news coverage. Manigault, they say, was one of the worst offenders. when General Kelly is, and they shouldn't call him that anymore, is talking about clamping down on access to the Oval, she's patient zero, a source close to the Trump administration said. The stories Manigault would present to Trump, often on a phone or a printout, would often enrage the president and resulted in him spending at least the rest of the day, wow, fuming about it. For example, one White House source noted that Manigault was one of the people who would bring to President Trump's attention online articles concerning MSNBC hosts and former Trump pals, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, slagging him, this is a quote, and his administration. This contributed, at least in small part, to the president's mounting rage against the MSNBC couple, which exploded in late June when Trump attacked them and tweeted that, among other things, Brzezinski was bleeding badly from a facelift. You remember what that guy is such an... he drives me bananas. All right. Manigault earned a reputation within the White House for this kind of stuff, and to many of her colleagues, it quickly overshadowed her comms duties and pro-Trump outreach to African-American audiences, of which she did almost none, I'm sure. Kelly is not thrilled by any means by Manigault, a West Wing official told the Daily Beast. He is, however, thrilled that he has been able to stop staffers, including Omarosa, from bolting into the Oval Office and triggering the president with White House palace intrigue stories. Now, there's a little bit more to the story, of course. Maybe we'll return to it after we stop just for a moment for our first station identification break. By the way, did you hear in the background? It's not gun fail going on in the background. It's Sunday night, and I guess somebody figures it being Labor Day and I guess the official end of summer and whatnot, that they want to use up all their fireworks. Isn't that great? I have to duck every once in a while just to be sure that it doesn't come through the window. I mean, it could be gun fail. It's Virginia, after all. Okay. As I mentioned, we're up for our first station identification break. We'll get back to this crazy Omarosa story right after this. And welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show right here on Netroots Radio. Thanks for hanging on with us at the end of the break. I know I left you on the edge of your seat waiting to find out exactly what else Omarosa Manigault might have been up to. It's really hard to believe that she's there at all, or that Trump is president. I know it's difficult for all of us. Let's see. I want to see if there's any more really great stories about the kind of dumb stuff she pulls. One of Kelly's first organizational changes upon taking the chief of staff job was to strictly limit and vet the information that aides put before the president during official work hours, anyway. According to a pair of internal memos first reported by Politico, Kelly also imposed new restrictions on what used to be very lax Oval Office walk-in privileges for senior staff. The free flow of information and casual pop-ins during the day had become a means for officials to enlist the president in their preferred policy initiatives, damage the standing of White House rivals in the president's eyes, or nudge Trump toward a particular attitude or mood. Of particular concern for Kelly were stories from conspiratorial right-wing websites that occasionally whipped Trump into a frenzy over issues such as the White House West Wing leak problem. In Manigault's case, sources said the stories generally originated at more obscure, gossipy websites and concerned White House palace intrigue, media personalities, or prominent Republicans in Congress. Ever since Kelly instituted the new regime, Trump's former reality TV co-star's capacity to influence her boss during the workday has taken a hit. She's not happy about it, another White House source said. She has a bond that goes back years with Trump and resents being cut off like everyone has. To be sure, the president still uses his private cell phone to speak with and solicit advice from a small inner circle of longtime aides and friends, Manigault among them. Though Kelly has sought to limit and streamline the pipeline of information into the Oval Office, there's not much he can do about the president's penchant for calling up his closest advisors, even at odd hours, once his staffers depart for the evening. As Kelly has clamped down on the information that reaches the president through official channels, Trump's inner circle has increasingly reverted to phone calls with the president directly. The sense is that Kelly is essentially powerless to block Trump off from a coterie of friends and allies that predate the White House by years. Manigault's loyalty to Trump is not driven by ideology or politics nearly as much as it is by their long-standing personal relationship. Her executive branch experience dates back to the 1990s when she had a brief stint in the Clinton administration. That job didn't last long, as she was reportedly a nightmare to work with, to the point that at least one female colleague wanted to inflict physical violence on her. Wow, that's linked too. I'm kind of curious about that one. Let's open that up. Before becoming a top Trump campaign surrogate and joining his Republican administration, Manigault was a big fan of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Manigault's passionate defense of Trump has sometimes escalated into her threatening people with supposed enemies lists, including one incident where she reportedly told a reporter that she was among several journalists on whom the White House officials kept dossiers of dirt. It's so great our enemies are making themselves clear so that when we get into the White House, we know where we stand, she had previously told IJR at Trump's election night celebration. Let me just tell you, Mr. Trump has a long memory, and we're keeping a list. The White House did not respond to a request for comment, and Manigault declined to comment on this story. Officials spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not cleared to talk about Omarosa. Kelly is not the first to attempt to limit access by some of Trump's longtime confidants, including Manigault. His predecessor, former Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, tried to structure West Wing meetings in May to cut down on the number of aides with direct access to Trump in those settings. The New York Times reported at the time that Priebus had sought to exclude Manigault in particular from as many meetings as possible. But Priebus mostly failed to meaningfully limit the steady flow of information to the president. The optimism aides expressed at the time about his effort to restructure internal White House operations could be a warning for Kelly, who was attempting to succeed where Priebus failed. The trains are now running on time. Trump's friend and confidant Tom Barrack boasted to the Times of White House restructuring efforts in May. 2 months later, Priebus was out of a job after routine public humiliation inflicted and sanctioned by Trump himself. Manigault was never much of a Reince loyalist either, even before he attempted to sideline her. Two sources told the Daily Beast that during the earliest days of the Trump White House's brief Anthony Scaramucci era, a relentlessly chaotic 10 days that kicked off with an attempted Scaramucci-led purge, Manigault was among the several Trump allies who sent in a list, yet another one of her stated lists, of people she thought Trump should fire. Her list skewed heavily toward establishment Republicans. Priebus was among the RNC guys on that list, according to one source with direct knowledge. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, my goodness, it's direct. Well, anyway, all very interesting. Not quite as in-depth or even as worrying as the New York Times piece on this same subject. Where is that one? Yes, this one, like I said, likely that you may have seen it or even read it yourself, but if not, you need to be up to date on this one. This one really got a lot of attention. Forceful chief of staff, that's John Kelly, grates on Trump, and the feeling is mutual. Glenn Thrush and Maggie Haberman on this one. That gives me pause these days, but okay. We'll soldier on and read it nonetheless. President Trump was in an especially ornery mood after staff members gently suggested he refrain from injecting politics into day-to-day issues of governing after last month's raucous rally in Arizona, and he responded by lashing out at the most senior aide in his presence. It happened to be his new chief of staff, John F. Kelly. Mr. Kelly, the former Marine general, brought in 5 weeks ago as the successor to Reince Priebus, reacted calmly, but he later told other White House staff members that he had never been spoken to like that during 35 years of serving his country. In the future, he said, he would not abide such treatment, according to 3 people familiar with the exchange. I have my doubts about that, if only because, I don't know. I mean, why did you stand for it at all? You know what I mean? You're not going to get away with this again. I have a feeling he probably will. I mean, you're either out the door or you're not. You're a Marine general. You can't blow up and just say, to hell with this. or screw you, I'm out of here. I mean, maybe I obviously wants to keep the job, but I don't know. It doesn't seem like a Marine general to me. But I did see a very interesting tweet about this one, and I don't think I have it at hand, but it was a great observation. Just the idea that after 35 years in the military, where they could be a little hard-nosed about being your boss and, kicking your ass in the military, 35 years of the military, and the biggest a-hole boss he's met to date is this one. A bigger a-hole than anybody he met in 35 years in the military. That is amazing. And it really brings back the idea, like I brought to mind for me, the whole weirdness of Trump as blue-collar hero or whatever. The white working class is so into him because he's so brash and tough and everything. And it's amazing to me that who's more familiar with the concept of the jerk a-hole boss than the white working class or blue-collar worker? You don't have to be white to know what it's like to have an a-hole boss, obviously. But it's like country song fodder that your boss is a jerk and an idiot and a rich a-hole, So, I don't know why they don't seem to recognize it. It's just amazing to me that they decided, oh, you know what I'll do? I'll show you liberal elitist latte sippers. I'm going to vote for the biggest, most famous a-hole boss in America. And he's going to implement policies that's going to make it that much easier for my a-hole boss to be an a-hole to me. And that'll show you. Yeah, you got me there. I don't really know what to tell you. Anyway, back to the real story here. While Mr. Kelly has quickly brought some order to a disorganized and demoralized staff, well, he brought them order. He didn't bring them morals or remoralize them, I guess. He is fully aware of the president's volcanic resentment about being managed, according to a dozen people close to Mr. Trump. And he has treaded gingerly through the minefield of Mr. Trump's psyche. This guy's not fit for the presidency is what this means. But the president has still bridled at what he perceives as being told what to do. God, I wish his mother would come back from the grave and smack his face. But she'd probably be on his side. Anyway, well, she's his mother. What are you going to do? And she's dead. It's not going to be very effective. Like every other new sheriff in town, Mr. Trump has hired to turn things around at the White House or in his presidential campaign. Mr. Kelly has gradually diminished in his appeal to his restless boss. What is different this time is that Mr. Trump, mired in self-destructive controversies and record-low approval ratings, needs Mr. Kelly more than Mr. Kelly needs him. Well, we'll see. Unlike many of the men and women eager to work for Mr. Trump over the years, the new chief of staff signed on reluctantly, more out of a sense of duty than a need for affirmation, personal enrichment, or fame. It is inevitable that a guy who will not be contained and does not want to be handled or managed was going to rebel against the latest manager who wanted to control him, said Roger Stone, the longtime Trump advisor who believes Mr. Kelly represents a kind of management coup by the triumvirate of two powerful retired generals, Mr. Kelly and Jim Mattis, the defense secretary, and one general who is still in the Army, National Security Advisor Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. Ultimately, Donald Trump is his own man, and he's going to resist all the control and regimented systems Kelly is trying to impose, Mr. Stone said. And he's probably right about that. For the 7 months of the Trump administration, the favorite parlor game in the West Wing has been guessing how long imperiled aides like Mr. Priebus would hang on before getting fired. But these days, it is Mr. Kelly's state of mind, not Mr. Trump's, that concerns the beleaguered aides, buoyed by the new chief's imposition of structure and clear lines of authority. The question now is how long Mr. Kelly will stay, with estimates ranging from a month to a year at the most. White House officials say that Mr. Kelly has given no indication he intends to leave anytime soon. He has thrown himself into long-term planning of the administration's tax reform push, the president's Asia trip in November, and scheduling for the next several months, they said. Mr. Kelly declined, through a White House spokeswoman, to comment for this article. For Mr. Trump, few ingredients matter more in a staff relationship than chemistry, and at times he and Mr. Kelly whose soldierly demeanor masks a slashing sense of humor, have enjoyed a mostly easy rapport. At commencement ceremonies at the Coast Guard Academy in May, Mr. Kelly elicited a big laugh from the president after Mr. Trump was presented with a ceremonial sword, and Mr. Kelly told him, "You can use that on the press." Mr. Trump, who has said he has surrounded himself with former military men from Central Casting, respects Mr. Kelly, aides said, because he looks like he's from Central Casting. He's such a genius. Love this guy's brain. On Friday morning, in the midst of a series of tweets heralding the recovery from Hurricane Harvey, listing the great things coming from his administration and taking another jab at James Comey, the former FBI director, the president restated his public admiration for his chief of staff. Here's the quote here, the tweet, the press release. "General John Kelly is doing a great job as chief of staff. I could not be happier or more impressed, and this administration continues to something, something, something." He continued in another tweet, and neither Glenn Thrush nor Maggie Haberman thought it was important enough to include that. And they're right. They're not wrong. Trademark. Long-serving advisors and friends remember when Mr. Trump also embraced the tighter controls imposed by Paul Manafort when he was brought on as campaign chairman in the middle of 2016. Then they saw Mr. Trump quickly turn on him. But in his short time in the White House, Mr. Kelly, a 67-year-old native of Boston, has had the most significant impact of any of the campaign or White House aides who have worked for Mr. Trump, according to interviews with a dozen current and former Trump aides and associates. He has regimented, as no one ever has done before, the flow of paper, people, and information inundating an omnivorous and undisciplined Mr. Trump. Omnivorous. I mean, they make it sound like he's a voracious reader, and he's not. Even of crap. He just isn't. The president, for his part, has marveled at the installation of management controls that would have been considered routine in any other White House. Wow. Look at that. Wow. "I now have time to think," a surprised Mr. Trump has told one of his senior aides repeatedly over the last few weeks. I don't know if that's such a great thing. Besides, what was all the golf about? Never mind. Mr. Kelly cannot stop Mr. Trump from binge-watching Fox News, which aides describe as the president's primary source of information gathering. So sad. But Mr. Trump does not have a web browser on his phone and does not use a laptop. So he was dependent on aides like Stephen Bannon, his former chief strategist, to hand-deliver printouts of articles from conservative media outlets. Now Mr. Kelly has thinned out his package of printouts so much that Mr. Trump plaintively asked a friend recently where the Daily Caller and Breitbart were. Mr. Kelly has told his staff time and time again that his goal is to rationalize the chaos that has engulfed the management of the West Wing. Managing Mr. Trump is beyond his or anyone else's powers, he has said repeatedly. While Mr. Trump still reaches out to allies outside the administration, especially old friends and associates like Corey Lewandowski, the former campaign manager, Richard Lefrak, a fellow developer originally from Queens, Mr. Bannon, and a handful of others, more often than not, it has been through the White House switchboard and not on his personal phone. And Mr. Kelly has usually listened in on the calls, according to two people with direct knowledge. Even Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, who has unfettered access to her father, has made a point of giving Mr. Kelly a heads up if she is going to talk to the president about policy or politics, according to one of Ms. Trump's friends. Mr. Kelly has his critics outside the administration, notably Mr. Stone, who has accused Mr. Kelly of keeping the president from his friends and allies. He also has critics inside the White House who've begun to complain that their access to Mr. Kelly has been limited. But Mr. Kelly's biggest accomplishments are ones that people outside the West Wing cannot see. When North Korea fired a missile over Japan last week, for example, he counseled Mr. Trump to deliver a stern rebuke he had written himself through a strong, measured, and spell-checked statement delivered via official White House email rather than a bombastic Twitter message. Yes, and by the way, it worked terrific because it now being Monday, we're all aware that over the weekend the North Koreans detonated yet another hydrogen bomb underground somewhere, causing a 5 8.2 earthquake to be felt all over the place. So yeah, we're back in it with them. That was a great effective remarks. They really scared the pants off the North Koreans. Mr. Kelly is close to Mr. Mattis and supported the Pentagon's decision to slow walk Mr. Trump's order to ban transgender troops from serving in the military, opting for the creation of a panel to study the matter before implementing a policy that is highly popular with the president's conservative base. Despite his crackdown on illegal immigrants and support for the Muslim travel ban in his previous job as Homeland Security Secretary, Mr. Kelly has been among those calling for Mr. Trump to proceed with caution on rolling back deferred action for childhood arrivals, the Obama-era policy for protecting from deportation immigrants who entered the country illegally as minors. Well, that one went the way of the North Korea warning as well. So two I wouldn't call them abject failures, but like within a week of issuing his super strong statements as chief of staff, the whole thing has been stood on its head. It's gotten nowhere. I mean, that might not be necessarily his fault, but let's not, wave his flag too vigorously here. Moving on, as he has moved swiftly to dispatch aides he deems unqualified by temperament, experience, or credential with a minimum of drama and fuss. Mr. Kelly, people close to the president, said backed the removals of Bannon, Sebastian Gorka, a flame-throwing White House staff member known more for his cable TV tirades than strategic acumen, and Anthony Scaramucci, the short-lived communications director who self-immolated in an expletive-filled interview with The New Yorker in July. That wasn't hard. The chief of staff keeps his own counsel and travels light. He brought over only a small handful of staff members from the Department of Homeland Security and confides to an even smaller circle, which includes Leon Panetta, for whom he served as a top aide when Mr. Panetta was defense secretary in the Obama administration. But how long Mr. Kelly and the president, two men with such divergent approaches to the common goal of Mr. Trump's success, will be able to coexist is unclear. Mr. Kelly has not been talking about it, apart from saying he is committed to stabilizing the staff in the White House. But one associate who spoke to Mr. Kelly last month said the former commander has remarked that his current assignment was by far the hardest job he had ever had. His favorite gig, he jokes, was his first, Marine grunt. And I guess it's even harder than doing that to work for this guy. Pretty amazing. Well, let's see. Gosh, there's a lot more and so many different directions that we can go with this. But I think we've caught up in the big news, I guess, that are represented by distinct pieces. There's, of course, many more big and overarching stories and a lot more small bits and pieces that we ought to catch up with. Let's, let's organize it and walk through it in just a second here, and then we'll figure out what we want to do with the second half of the show after we get to, let's get some of these other tidbits on the record here. Here's one that I thought we would update on. The Inspector General at the Treasury Department, I have read, is now actually interested in looking into Steve Mnuchin and his wife's trip to Fort Knox in conjunction with the eclipse, of course. And everybody immediately discerned that, he probably timed that to get down there and watch the eclipse, which he said he watched from the roof of Fort Knox. And I'm sure it was very exciting. And yes, the Treasury Secretary has some business every once in a while, I guess, in Fort Knox. It is, after all, a Treasury installation. But, whether he was going to check to see whether the gold was still there or what, I have no idea. But okay, fine, whatever. Well, anyway, I guess that shot of her getting off the plane with all the shopping bags that she put on Instagram, I guess, was just too much to not launch an investigation. And it seems pretty clear that the whole purpose of that trip, for her anyway, I mean, she can do that shopping anywhere, obviously. I don't think Mr. Billionaire's wife had to go to Kentucky to do her luxury shopping. It actually teaches us, it's a teaching moment. You see, you can go to Kentucky and find all the finest boutiques there just the same as you might on Fifth Avenue in New York. So stop looking down your nose at Kentucky and highbrow Kentucky shopping, right? Okay, well, we learned something there. That's true. But obviously the whole thing was about showing off to her friends and getting that Instagram photo of her coming off of the government plane. She wanted a shot of her getting off a plane that said United States of America on it. Because they could have gone, he's a billionaire. He could have chartered a plane. He probably owns a plane. They could have gone on a private plane, but a picture of her getting off of some nondescript private plane, or God forbid, a commercial jet with all of those bags, Instagramming that would just be tacky. Her friends would not like that. That's just, what, just shopping in another state that you flew to shop for the day? Everybody does that. We're not interested in that. What's cool here is that you commandeered a government plane to do it. And anyway, I figured that was probably at the heart of what she was after from this trip. And of course, that's the heart of what he was after, because he was after making her happy. And that's not a terrible thing to do for your wife, right? The make her happy part. But stealing from the government to do it, that sucks, especially if you're a billionaire. I don't know why she was so thrilled about that. But okay, whatever. They have a complex relationship. For about 10 minutes, they've had a complex relationship. What are you going to do? Anyway, so now he's under investigation. But I was also curious because it was an immediate response like, oh, well, maybe the Treasury Secretary, because he's in the line of succession. And he's not real high in the line of succession. But then again, so many people in this line of succession ought to be under indictment like now, yesterday, 6 months ago, a year ago, that I guess it makes a difference how high, if you're 10th in the line of succession, that could be pretty serious. So somebody suggested that maybe he has to take a government plane. So I just thought I would note for the record that Glenn Kessler, the fact check guy, the Pinocchio guy for the Washington Post, tweeted the other day that he just says, when I covered Treasury and when Summers and O'Neill were Treasury Secretary, I guess that's when he had that job, and when he traveled with them, they took commercial flights. So it's just flat not the case that they had to take that government plane. They just wanted to. So, yeah, and he attaches the Washington Post story about the fact that there's going to be this Inspector General review. I don't know how serious a thing that is. That may just be the mechanism that they use for saying, well, it wasn't terrible, and we're not recommending any reprimand of him. It just, we wish that there had been better optics involved. And so I don't expect anything serious to come out of that one. But I thought I would put that on the record anyway. Let's see. Other interesting things that are of note that we can perhaps include before the break. Let's see. Well, we can certainly hint at a couple of things, including I've got a fairly significant collection. Maybe we'll just save this for the second half of the show. A fairly significant collection of stories about Russian bots on Twitter and Facebook and the like, and how you can spot them and what they're up to these days, and some weird stories about their relationship with the platform that they're chiefly active on Twitter, that I think is a little speculative but a little disconcerting too. And it's the sort of thing that I wouldn't be ordinarily quite ready to run with. It still falls a little bit in Louise Mensch's corner there, but I have a feeling that we will appreciate it at some point if we put some of this stuff on the record if it breaks. You know what I mean? I think we want to be a little bit ahead of the curve on that one. And we also, let's see, we've got some other information on, there's been more writing, more treatment in the mainstream press for the story of Russian hacking of election officials and of elections officials organizations, overseers, secretaries of state and boards of election, etc. And of course, another round of stories about how there's not enough rounds of stories about these things and how nobody's paying attention to it. And of course, we did, and we read that story. So we'll see if there's anything new about it or whether it's just supposed to shame the rest of the world into paying attention to this story. I'm not sure which one it is. We'll find out when we get to it. But I feel like we were ahead of the curve on that one. Let's follow up on what's new about that, and let's get ahead of things on the bots. And I guess lastly, I don't know, is it worth teasing at this point? Because I'm not certain that we're ever going to be able to get around to it. But Sheriff Arpaio and his crazy ass are still in the news. And, of course, his having been pardoned has engendered a lot of discussion as well. And you and I, from reading on the show, of course, know a good bit about the constitutional sheriffs movement. That is, that they're crazy and they've misinterpreted everything. But there's a lot of writing and a lot of focus on what they're about in light of the pardon that I think we ought to catch up with as well. All right, but all those things, of course, we'll have to catch up with on the other side of our second big break for station identification coming up right now. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. Thanks for waiting with us through the break, and we're into the second hour of the show. And man, there's just so much that I have to try and cram in here. I don't think I'm going to be able to cram it all in here. You can all cram it though. How about that? And I'll knock off for the night. All right, not what I meant. Bots. What are they? How do they work? I need to put on my my Ali G voice for that one for my intro. Bots. What are they? How do they work? What is wrong with them? I don't know. It's I'm reminded of one of my favorite openings was the one on technology, which he pronounced as techmology. What is it? How does it work? So anyway, bots. What are they? I don't know. You know, we all know sort of what they're used for, and why they're in the news. But I have this collection of stories about them, how to spot them, what they're up to, whether or not they're Russian, and some other things that if this works right, we'll be ready for the story to break. One of the things that I think I'll have to set aside in terms of reading it all the way through. I mentioned to you earlier, the New York Times did a story the other day, Russian election hacking efforts, wider than previously known, draw little scrutiny. This is a September 1st piece from Friday. Let's see, Nicole Perlroth, Michael Wines, and Matthew Rosenberg, all with very easy for me with my Western tongue to pronounce Western names. I have to get better at the non-Western. Still bothers me. But okay, you've likely seen this piece. A lot of discussion about this one. And we have been talking about these things. They have drawn scrutiny on our show. But of course, like I say, we're always relying on the reports of our mainstream traditional press for the most part on these things, with a little dash of fun speculation from online sources thrown in for good measure. The basic gist of this story takes us back to the North Carolina problems with their polling books. Remember that? And that they weren't experiencing hacking that they suspected was changing vote totals, and they weren't hacking machines, and they weren't quite doing things that straightforwardly, but they suspected that the outside vendors that they had used to supply their electronic polling books that they used to check people in at each precinct the vendor had been hacked, and that and a large number of these counties and precincts got what were essentially corrupted electronic poll books, and they had a hell of a time with people showing up to vote and being told they had already voted or that they weren't registered anymore, but all kinds of chaos that got created in the bluest counties of North Carolina, which is troubling all by itself. It didn't change the outcome of the election in those counties or in those precincts, but it very likely meant that the statewide vote total was lower, and who knows where else that might have been going on. So this is a much more in-depth report, of course, than the quick summary. I'm just giving you the background of what story were they covering here. But we've definitely been over this territory, but I would recommend to you taking a look at this second go-round. Much of it will be familiar to you, but always worth your time to remind yourself about what was going on here and what kind of problems it can cause. So I'll include that in the roundup for background. But let me get on instead to the bot situation. I have two articles here, both in Medium, which are from the DFR Lab, the Digital Forensic Research Lab, the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. And both of them are a little hairy. They're a little difficult to get through in terms of the way they formatted them, and that might be partly Medium's fault. And then one other piece that's from BuzzFeed that reminds us that it isn't just the Russians involved in the bot world. So let me, I guess I'll start with the one from the DFR Lab, Battle of the Botnets. This is a July 28th piece. Their follow-up from August 28th. They waited a whole month to tell you how you could spot a bot. I think we all have a pretty good suspicion of what goes into these things, but I thought I might take a look at that. The Battle of the Botnets. President Trump's fans and foes go head-to-head with Twitter bots, which is an enormous waste of time, and I think that's probably a good part of the reason they operate. I think last week we were talking about the seemingly what appeared to be bot-driven attempts to confound all sense and reason by blaming President Obama for Hurricane Katrina response. Of course, he wasn't the president. And I think a couple thousand people probably spent, well, if they spent even a second on it, it was too much, but they spent hours battling with people who appeared to be actual American citizens who were confused or otherwise about whether or not Obama was the president after Katrina. And it seems impossible. And I had a feeling that it wasn't just straight up bots, that it was people just essentially trolling, looking for ways to make you angry and spend your time in unproductive ways. And you shouldn't be paying attention to every single thing the bots do. But I guess if we have a better overall picture of who they are and what they do and why they do the things they do, we'll be able to, I don't know what, hopefully plan accordingly. Let's see what the Digital Forensic Lab has to say about this. One of the most unsettling trends in the American political debate is the distortion of discussions on social media by automated accounts. This post details one such discussion on Twitter and the types of account that distorted it. So one good example of what's going on here. On July 20th, the New York Times published an editorial calling U.S. President Donald Trump his own worst enemy. The phrase quickly began to trend on Twitter, provoking accusations that the platform itself was colluding, and that's in scare quotes, with Trump's opponents. And there's embedded a tweet here from Paul Joseph Watson, the Prison Planet dude, who's like the more Alex Jones even, right? New York Times publishes another hit piece on Trump. He says, Twitter makes it trend. There's your collusion, with a little laughing smiley face emoji. And then in quotes here, Trump is his own worst enemy. Now, DFR Lab investigated the Twitter traffic to see whether there are any signs that it was manipulated, especially by automated bot accounts, which can retweet other users' posts without any human intervention. The analysis shows that traffic around the phrase "Trump is his own worst enemy" was repeatedly distorted by clusters of automated accounts of various sorts. One reason the phrase trended for hours was because users both for and against President Trump argued about it, highlighting the unintended consequences of attacking a topic. Traffic on the phrase was moderate, reaching some 7,500 tweets during the day. Nonetheless, it makes an excellent case study in the different sorts of bots and the ways in which they can distort the way humans discuss issues on social media, in this case, Twitter. So first, there are news bots here. The battle of the botnets began, look at this, they have a whole timestamp on it, at 7:23:19 UTC, or 3:23 and 19 seconds Eastern Standard Time, on July 20th, or at least this battle did, soon after the New York Times published its article online and almost 12 hours before the New York Times tweeted about it. And they have a whole timeline of it here, embedded here for illustration. In the dark of the New York night, a slew of Twitter accounts began tweeting an identical message. The text, "Trump is his own worst enemy," by Charles M. Blow via New York Times. And here it is. Here's one of them from Gary Cattermole is the name associated with it. "Trump is his own worst enemy" by Charles M. Blow via New York Times. It has a link. It has the picture illustrating it, the print article, the whole bit. So it's sort of like a neutral tweeting of the thing. Here is the story. In the space of 17 minutes, 50 different accounts tweeted the exact same wording. This screen grab is from a machine scan. Shows a sample. Okay. So there's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I don't know, 12, a dozen or so profiles. All have tweeted the same thing. Of course, you know, it's interesting when you go to the story that it links to. I mean, if you just hit the tweet button for that story, isn't that what it does? What it puts in there? Like I'm going to go to the story right now. So what does it offer me? My tweet is going to be, "Trump is his own worst enemy," right? And that's as far as it goes. That's exactly what. Yeah, I mean, I guess. Does it say by Charles M. Blow? No, it doesn't. So it's like, I guess they did create their own content there. They didn't use the New York Times' tweetable content that they offered up. All right, well, let's get rid of that. I was just, like, for a second there, I was like, wait, this whole story is going to be baseless. So, enclosed in quotes, "Trump is his own worst enemy," and then with the byline, and in capital letters, it's all caps, by Charles M. Blow, via NYT. Then it has the shortened link, and then hashtag leadership. And that's the intriguing part. Do they all have that? I guess the hashtag leadership isn't there, but all of them have Charles M. Blow in all caps and the identical shortened link. So, the use of the phrase "via NYT" indicates that these posts were shared directly from the New York Times website. Many of the accounts also included the telltale URL shortener ift.tt in their tweets. This is a service run by a company called ifttt.com, which allows users to automate their posts with an "if this, then this" routine. For example, if a post contains a certain hashtag, retweet it. Interesting. I've always been kind of curious about the nuts and bolts about the way these things work. So essentially, here's a screen grab of an ifttt.com page of sample applets for Twitter. So basically a new New York Times tech article posts to Twitter, and your bot has the instructions: if hashtag, then retweet it. So if it has a certain hashtag, anything that has that will get retweeted. Okay. The combination of via NYT and the ift.tt web address suggests that these posts were automatically generated using a routine from ifttt.com. Effectively, if the New York Times posts an article, share it direct from the website. However, these accounts cannot be characterized as an anti-Trump botnet. They appear automated to tweet anything that various news outlets, not just the New York Times, publish, regardless of the actual content, from restaurant reviews to sports reports and eBay commercials. Why? The most obvious examples are one name that there's little point in trying to pronounce it, not because it's super difficult or foreign, but because it's gibberish. But okay, here's a couple examples here, each of which shared the post at 7:25 UTC, a few seconds apart. These are the most active Twitter accounts the author of this article has ever seen. One of them here, Anthony7289U. I mean, that's the kind of, the other one is more gibberishy, but that one at least has Anthony and a bunch of numbers in there. So this account, this Anthony7289U, whatever, was created on May 20th, 2017, and by July 26th, just a little over 2 months later, had posted 105,000 tweets. Mostly shares via a mixture of websites, with Fox News, the New York Times, and eBay prominent among them. This equates to an average of 1,590 tweets per day, an inhuman rate of posting. And I mean literally inhuman. The other one, which I guess we'll give it a shot, the first name of this handle, BUUQYE _ ZIIQPU. See, was there a point in trying to pronounce that? This account shared a similar style of posts, but was even more active. Created on June 12th, 2017, it had tweeted 74,200 times by July 27th, an average of 1,638 posts per day. Here's a screen grab of a typical one here. These are obvious bots, but they are not political bots. Their main activity appears to be advertising eBay products. That at least makes some sense, right? The other apparent bots in this first wave of amplifiers appeared to have more specialized tastes. GazCat, the one we looked at before, that's the actual handle of the one we identified as Gary Cattermole. GazCat. Oops, I've lost my place here. Where are we? GazCat, the very first to post Blow's article, shares articles from the New York Times, HBR.org, Entrepreneur.com, and, unusually, TWTD.co.uk, a fan account for UK soccer team Ipswich Town. In a separate scan of tweets posted from July 13th to July 27th, this account posted an average of 49.9 tweets per day. All of them, apparently, shares from news sources. A second account, Herschel's IV is what it looks like. It's Herschel's, and then, I don't know, it is IV. Herschel's 4, Herschel Civ, I have no idea what that's supposed to be. Shares the New York Times, the Boston radio station WBUR.org, and U.S. public broadcaster NPR. As of July 26, all its most recent posts were shares via its usual websites without comment. A machine scan of its tweets between July 13th and July 27th shows that it posted an average of 212 times per day, the vast majority of these from news sites. A cluster of these early posters shared the name at RichTVX, plus the name of a country. In other words, RichTVX India, or RichTVX Russia, or RichTVX Lebanon, for example. These largely share New York Times posts and Fox News alerts, often with little or no content relevant to the country name. It is a little bit weird, but they have all their own accounts. There's a RichTVX Russia, RichTVX India, They're all out there. Here's an embedded tweet from Rich TVX Russia. 5 places to shop in Seville by Shivani Vora via New York Times, and then a link. What would that have to do with Russia? Nobody knows. However, the India variant shared stories from the Times of India as well. And here's a tweet from Rich TVX India, and there you go. Times of India story. Overall, these bots do not appear to have had any political motivation. Some largely focused on the New York Times. Others shared a wider variety of outlets. None, however, added their own comments to the articles shared, other than that one that added the phrase, "Hey, look at this article," to each post, or appeared to select the articles according to subject matter. Each one only tweeted the New York Times article once. Their only effect, therefore, was to create a small spike in Twitter traffic in the early hours of the U.S. morning. Now, on to anti-Trump bots, the Octobernet. At 9:58 UTC, however, the editorial's author, Charles M. Blow, tweeted his article to his 371,000 followers. Here it is. Read my column, Trump is his own worst enemy, and let me know what you think. With a link, this time to using the New York Times, shortening link, same photo, same setup, direct from the New York Times website. This was rapidly amplified, with the first retweet coming in less than a minute. This is fast, but not unusual given the number of followers Blow has. A more unusual move began half an hour later at 10:20 UTC when 16 accounts retweeted Blow's post in the same minute. It is no coincidence that they did so simultaneously. These accounts regularly retweet the same posts at the same time, and many of them were even created on the same day. For example, that is the accounts were. For example, at Filling DC Swamp, at Could Be Delusion, and at Just Trying to Keep Up were all created within a few hours of each other on October 21st. And there's some screen caps of their home pages in here. On July 26th, the accounts in this network retweeted, in the same order, the same articles from shareblue.com, crooksandliars.com, and dailycoast.com. Hooray! We're caught up in the bot controversy. This network can be thought of as the October Group. 6 of them were created on October 21st, 2016, and 3 more were created on October 23rd. In the machine scan from July 13th to 27th, they only posted small numbers of tweets, between 150 and 300. But over 99% of these were either retweets or simple shares from websites, and all were anti-Trump. This has every indication of being a botnet created in late 2016 in order to amplify anti-Trump messaging. As the timeline given above shows, its presence caused a distinct spike in the overall traffic when they engaged. Next section, send in the cyborgs. Over the following hours, traffic increased, consistent with the east coast of the United States coming online. Much of this traffic appears to have been organic, with minor peaks and troughs in activity, but with the general upward trend. At 11:07 UTC, online monitor Trendinalia tweeted that the New York Times piece had begun to trend, with 244 users and 246 tweets, 222 of them retweets. The next spike came at 12:19 when user Prison Planet, there you are, real name Paul Joseph Watson, an editor at the U.S. alt-right site InfoWars, which has over 600,000 followers, accused Twitter of collusion with the New York Times to make it trend. Watson's post caused an immediate surge in traffic. This need not be surprising given the size of his following. However, analysis shows that the most significant spike, a jump at 12:20, was supported by automated accounts. One of the accounts to retweet Watson at 12:20 was 3XT1. Created in April 2010, this account has posted 283,000 tweets by July 26th, an average rate of 107 per day. As of July 26th, every single one of its most recent posts was not just a retweet, but a double retweet, once with the word retweeted added at the start. Some examples are embedded here for you to see. In the July 13th to 27th scan, this account posted 4,525 tweets in 2 weeks, 323 a day on average, and 98% were retweets. The other 2% appeared to be authored posts. This suggests that the account is a cyborg, largely automated, to amplify pro-Trump messaging, but with an account holder who periodically engages in person. Much the same can be said of the account Resident of Florida, another of the accounts which retweeted Watson at 12:20 and which repeatedly shares pro-Trump material. Between July 13th and 27th, this account posted 5,360 tweets, or an average of 383 per day. 96% of them were retweets. Another 4% were authored posts, suggesting that this too is a cyborg. Yet another account to retweet Watson at 12:20 was D. Rice Bowl. Created on October 20th, 2016, it had posted 44,500 tweets and 120,000 likes by July 26th, the great majority of these pro-Trump. This equates to 160 tweets and 430 likes per day. In the 2-week scan in July, over 99% of its posts were retweets. This is bot-like behavior. Accounts such as these appear to have contributed significantly to the spike at 12:20 UTC. As such, they also helped to keep the phrase "Trump is his own worst enemy" trending. However, they do not appear to belong to a single network as the October group do. Rather, they seem to share a common agenda, amplifying similar material. The final spikes. Traffic saw one more major spike before it began to decline. This was around 1300 UTC, or 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. 3 tweets drove the majority of the traffic. In chronological order, they were a post from Blow at 12:59 UTC saying that his article was trending, a post from CNN commentator Keith Boykin at 13:04 praising Blow's article, and a post from online gambling account Everyone Bets at 13:12 implicitly criticizing the article. And those tweets are embedded here for you to look at. This time around, Blow's tweet appears to have spread more organically. Most of the accounts that retweeted it early on have human behavior patterns with a relatively low rate of posting and a high proportion of authored tweets and replies, generally signs of human behavior. Some do show some bot-like tendencies, notably for some accounts. Retweets make up 90% of their posts, but their rate of posting is low, and they do not appear to have much content in common with each other, making the identification of a bot or botnet ambiguous. Much the same can be said of the amplifiers of Boykin, who has 81,800 followers. A few of his earliest retweeters have some bot-like characteristics, with over 90% of their posts being retweets, all anti-Trump. However, the majority of these accounts that retweeted him have human behavior patterns. In the case of these 2 posts, the bulk of activity appears to have been organic and consistent with the time of day, around 9 a.m. EST, and the size of their followings. Automated accounts may have played some role, but do not appear to have greatly distorted the traffic. The outstanding account is Everyone Bets. That's every, and then the number 1, bets. The vast majority of its posts concern gambling, not surprisingly. Despite this, its political tweet was retweeted 186 times in a little over 6 minutes, or approximately once every 2 seconds, causing the highest spike in traffic. All the earliest accounts to retweet Everyone Bets show remarkably similar behavior patterns. All post in a mix of English, French, and Arabic, with some also adding Chinese and Spanish. All their content appears to be exclusively retweets, largely of a commercial nature, and they repeatedly share the same content. This is classic botnet behavior, more specifically the behavior of a commercial international botnet. Such behavior highlights an online economy not specific to any country that can monetize trending conversations on social media, as DFR Lab has reported. We'll have to continue with this one after our next break for station identification. And we're back with more of the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Our exciting conclusion coming up now that we are done with our station identification breaks. Thanks for waiting with us. And let's get to the point of this, if we can, with the DFR lab piece here. We left off by mentioning that this was a great illustration of classic botnet behavior and sort of defining the terminology that they use as between bots and cyborgs and botnets, and in this case here, a commercial international botnet. Where we left off, it says, of course, such behavior highlights an online economy, not specific to any country, that can monetize trending conversations on social media, as DFR Lab has reported, with a linked article to do all the explaining. Under the headline of Influence for Sale, Bot Shopping on the Dark Net. The surprising feature, the article we are currently reading continues, the surprising feature is that on this occasion, the bots turned to a political subject rather than its usual commercial ones. This may suggest that the amplification of the Everyone Bets tweet was paid for. The conclusion of this piece, then, the Twitter traffic around the phrase Donald Trump is his own worst enemy is a case study in the use and behavior of bots. It illustrates both the different types of bots in circulation and the way in which they can distort online debate. The traffic began with a number of news bots whose only purpose appears to be to share various news sources. These are generally neutral bots. Their effect in this case was to create a small early spike in traffic without having any impact on subsequent traffic, which dropped back to almost zero. The traffic began to grow organically some hours later, but was distorted by the intervention of the October bots, a network of political influencers amplifying anti-Trump messages. Less than an hour after those bots engaged, the hashtag was trending, probably due in part to their intervention. Watson's response to the trending message triggered another spike, boosted by a number of accounts with cyborg tendencies. Unlike the October group, these appears to have acted independently, their preferred mode of operation being rapid retweeting rather than sharing stories online. Ironically, their intervention helped keep the phrase they attacked trending. Finally, the Everyone Bets group showcased yet another different sort of network. These accounts clearly belong in a single group, but do not appear to have a political focus. Rather, they seem to have a commercial focus. What is most striking is the sheer number of opposing bot groups involved in this one incident. The New York Times story was amplified in turn by news bots, anti-Trump bots, pro-Trump cyborgs, and a group of commercial bots, all in the space of a few hours and a few thousand tweets. Their interventions repeatedly distorted the Twitter conversation, as the spike in the timelines demonstrate. Thus, the key lesson of the Trump is his own worst enemy incident is the extent to which automated accounts are shaping traffic and potentially trends in the U.S. political debate online. All of that from Ben Nemo, whose name we have called before. He's the Senior Fellow for Information Defense at the Atlantic Council's DFR Lab. It's interesting. I mean, it ended up being a more dry and technical examination of different kinds of bots. He's got another piece here. Did Nemo write this one? Which I'll save for later, or perhaps we'll read or provide for you to read offline. It's rather lengthy. It also is Ben Nemo's thing, but it's basically how to spot bots, although I think we got a lot of the gist of that one from this rather dry piece. But I guess one of the questions is, of course, who's running this stuff? And we've heard lots about Russian hackers and whatever else, and not really hackers running the botnets per se, but people who are essentially in exchange for money just engaging in paid distortion of the debate online. But it's not all just Russians. I have this BuzzFeed News piece here that I think is interesting. Never mind the Russians. Meet the bot king who helps Trump win Twitter. Joseph Bernstein writes this piece here. At 7:23 on Sunday evening, the conservative internet personality Mike Cernovich tweeted that former National Security Advisor Susan Rice had requested the, quote, unmasking of Americans connected to the Trump campaign who were incidentally mentioned in surveillance readouts. In case you were wondering about the dateline on this one, it is old, of course. You'll recognize it from that story. April 5th, 2017 is the dateline on this one. At 7:30, the owner of the Twitter account Micro Magic Jingle TM, that's what it says, Micro Magic Jingle TM, like trademark, noticed and began blasting out dozens of tweets and retweets about the story. Would be nice to get Susan Rice trending, he tweeted at 8:16, and then he made exactly that happen. Micro Magic Jingle TM is the latest incarnation of Microchip, a notorious pro-Trump Twitter ringleader once described by a Republican strategist as the Trump bot overlord. He has been suspended from the service so frequently he can't recall the exact number of times. A voluminous tweeter, his specialty is making hashtags trend. Over the next 24 hours, following his own call to arms, Microchip tweeted or retweeted more than 300 times about Rice, including everything from a photoshopped image of Donald Trump eating her head out of a taco bowl to demands that she die in jail, and almost always accompanied by the tag Susan Rice. Meanwhile, in massive threaded tweets and DM groups, he implored others to do likewise, and they're embedded here. And you can see what he's doing. He's just basically, all his tweets are a list of other allied Twitter accounts, their names, and then the word Susan Rice, and then the hashtag Susan Rice, a clue to them that they should just do whatever they can. They just retweet the word Susan Rice over and over again if they want to, but that they should turn on to the story and help make it trend. I'm sure, we've all seen it happening or imagined it happening. Anyway, by 9 a.m. Monday, the tag was being tweeted nearly 20,000 times an hour and was trending on Twitter. By 11 a.m., 34,000 an hour. As of Tuesday morning, the tag was still trending, partially thanks to a tweet from Donald Trump Jr. At 4:48 p.m. Monday, 18-odd hours after he started his campaign, Microchip was ready to call it a success. Embedded is the tweet in which he does so. Starting with a single Cernovich article, we knocked this one out of the park. We can do this every day, just like we did before. Before? What did he mean by before? Before the election, before the campaign, and long before, since before Russian interference, quote unquote, was the mantra of every political consultant, British former member of parliament, and American senator turned Tolstoy enthusiast, Microchip has been figuring out how to make pro-Trump tags go viral on Twitter. When people talk about Russian Twitter bots, they are, very likely, sometimes talking about his work. They've ranged from the innocuously rah-rah Trump train hashtag to the wildly xenophobic rapefugees to the extremely unconfirmed hashtag Cruz sex scandal and hashtag Hillary groped me. What they've all had in common is a method, the focus of speculation for nearly a year, and a chief promulgator, Microchip, about whom little is known. I could be doing this, by the way, for us. I do this all the time. Very often I'm worried I'll be suspended for just tweeting the same story 10, 15 times with a different comment attached to it. I just like to do that. I like to talk. You see, I have a radio show. Indeed, Microchip, who operates behind a VPN, a special secure network that obscures his location, is an object of fascination and fear even among some of his political and ideological fellow travelers who hope not to end up on the wrong side of one of his Twitter campaigns. One conservative observer of the alt-right who spoke with BuzzFeed on the condition that his name not be used claimed he once hired private investigators to trace him. You can't, the observer wrote in a text message. He's too good. Gee willikers. Unconvincing internet investigations have suggested that Microchip could be anyone from the prominent alt-righter Baked Alaska, remember him, to Justin McConney, the director of social media for the Trump Organization, to a shadowy Russian puppet master. But in an interview with BuzzFeed News, the first with the media organization, Microchip said the truth, both about his identity and the method he developed for spreading pro-Trump messages on Twitter, is far more prosaic. Though he would not divulge his real name or corroborate his claim, Microchip said he is a freelance mobile software developer in his early 30s and lives in Utah. In a conversation over the gaming chat platform Discord, hey, remember that? Microchip, who speaks unaccented, idiomatic American English, said he guards his identity so closely for two reasons. First, because he fears losing contract work due to his beliefs, and second, because of what he calls an uninformed discourse in the media and Washington around Russian influence and botting. I feel like I'm a scientist, showing electricity to natives that have been convinced electricity is created by Satan, so they murder the scientists, he said. Indeed, in a national atmosphere charged by unproven accusations about massive networks of Russian social media influence, the story of how Microchip helped build the most notorious pro-Trump Twitter network seems almost mundane, less a technologically daunting intelligence operation than a clever patchwork of tools nearly any computer-literate person could manage. It also suggests that some of the current Russian Trump bot hysteria may be, well, hysteria. It's all us, not Russians, Microchip said, and we're not going to stop. Microchip claims he was a longtime staunch liberal who turned to Twitter in the aftermath of the November 2015 terrorist attacks in Paris and, quote, found out that I didn't like what was going on, so I red-pilled myself. Oh, boy. Through Twitter, he found a network of other people who thought liberal politicians had blindly acceded to PC culture and who had found a champion in Donald Trump. In his early days on the platform, Microchip said he started testing, dabbling in anti-PC tags like rapefugees and seeing what went viral. His experience as a mobile developer had exposed him to the Twitter API, and a conversation with a blogger who ran social media bots convinced him he could automate the Twitter trending process. Micro is a true believer, alt-right guy, wrote the Alt-Right Observer, who had Microchip investigated. He's brilliant and is not LARPing, live action role-playing, right? His tech skills are as real as his OPSEC, or operational security, as Microchip found other like-minded accounts. He said they began to organize themselves into enormous 50-person direct message groups. Within these groups, members would distribute content from the Drudge Report and Reddit's r/the Donald subreddit, then tweet it with a common decided hashtag and retweet one another's tweets ad infinitum. Microchip called the DM rooms simply retweet groups, and by September of last year there were 15 of them. Some of the groups were chock full of egg and anime avatars, according to Microchip, but others were composed of Christian conservatives or hardcore Zionists. Taken together, they were like a strange Twitter mirror image of the Trump coalition. Microchip added automation to these dedicated DM groups, which he insisted are populated entirely by real people with real accounts. He started using Add Me Fast, a kind of social media currency exchange in which people can retweet or like other tweets in exchange for points that they can then spend to list their own content, such as pro-Trump hashtagged tweets, to be promoted. You can also buy these points, and an investment of several $100s, according to Microchip, can yield thousands or even tens of thousands of retweets. A third component of Microchip's blended army of DM groups and crowdsourced social media signal boosters were simple Google script bots. These bots, which Microchip said you don't have to do any programming at all to run, can be programmed to find and like or retweet tweets featuring certain terms or hashtags. We learned about that just a moment ago. At its height, Microchip said, the network he helped create could reliably generate 35,000 retweets a day. It's high volume, and it takes work, he said. You can't take a break. You sit at the screen waiting for breaking news 12 hours per day when you're knee-deep in it. It's hard work. Microchip would sometimes reach his daily limit of 1,000 tweets a day, sometimes taking Adderall to focus, though he added, shaping a message is exhilarating. Along the way, Twitter started to suspend Microchip's accounts. First, his original handle, WDFX2EU, whatever that's supposed to mean. Then subsequent variations, each started with a link to his Keybase page to verify his identity, and each presided over by the same avatar, the Instagram hunk Brock O'Hearn, wearing a Make America Great Again hat and eating an ice cream cone. Microchip showed BuzzFeed dozens of other accounts he owns, ready to activate if and when his current account, WDF X2EU95, gets suspended. In the hours after this story was originally published, that account indeed was suspended. While it may take work to stay active, Microchip said he has an ideal platform in Twitter with which to shape his message. Twitter is easier than other social networks and more volatile, he said. Emotions run high at 140 characters. The chaos is perfect. Microchip is well aware that many of the tags and stories he promotes haven't been proven or aren't true. He's thrown his network behind Pizzagate and spirit cooking. And days before the election, he posted a tweet to r/TheDonald about an alleged plot by then-President Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton to have Trump assassinated in Reno. "This ignorant S needs to be stopped," replied one user. "I can make whatever claims I want to make," Microchip shot back. "That's how this game works." It's true that Microchip can make any claim that he wants, and it's impossible to say that his stories about his identity are true. He could be Vladimir Putin. But multiple aspects of his method can be confirmed. Microchip provided records of his activity on AdMeFast to BuzzFeed News. Alt-right sources confirmed that he was a consistent presence in their DM groups, and the day after the election, multiple pro-Trump accounts thanked him for his efforts. Micro put in serious work during the election, and I really respect his lack of ego, said another source within the Trump internet world who has worked closely with Microchip. He's anonymous, and he doesn't care about the credit. Indeed, the fact that Microchip's work, that much pro-Trump internet activity, is now reflexively assumed to be part of a Russian influence campaign is one of the reasons Microchip wanted to explain how he helped build it. Not to take credit, he repeatedly referred to the network as a group effort, but to set the record straight. "I'm not Russian," Microchip said. "I don't work for Trump. There could very well be Russian bots. I just never saw them, and we were in this pretty deep. We've been on Twitter every day for the last year and a half. I haven't seen any bots that I don't know who they are." And if Microchip is a Russian agent, it's worth wondering why he, nearly 3 months into the Trump presidency, has plans to expand his network in the coming weeks with a new set of botting tools. In a Twitter argument Monday with the Brooklyn developer Nathan Bernard, Microchip teased that his network is about to get much, much bigger. The botnet is about to happen 10 times, in about a week. He wrote, "Get ready." So, I guess we better get ready, although this is a story from April. So, I don't know. Are we ready? Did it happen? Did we not notice? Is it still about to happen? Not sure. But there's more, and more reasons why it might actually be something to worry about after all. And here's one of the things that struck me over the weekend. Here's where we'll get a little bit more speculative. And you start to wonder about these bots, even if they're not Russian. And it is important to note that, this story makes plain that a lot of it is at least driven domestically. And I could see that being the case. But I could also see it being the case that, if you're only after retweets, then it doesn't really matter to you whether those are paid retweets or Russian botted retweets or whatever. Some of them might be actual people, but they don't exactly behave like actual people. They just are in Twitter to retweet stuff and not anything else. So you begin to wonder what, if anything, Twitter might do about the fact that so much of the conversation taking place on Twitter isn't really anything that involves human beings. But I don't know whether they care, just so long as the site is busy and actively used and everyone can see that there's lots and lots of stuff going on it. But there's also a couple of good points that were made over the weekend by part of the speculative community, let's say. Beginning here with a tweet from John Schindler, who you may know as 20 Committee, and he's pretty deep into the speculation about the Trump-Russia connection. But he points out that one of the reasons Twitter hasn't really done anything about it in response to someone else's questions, have to wonder why Twitter tolerates bots devaluing their platform, especially those working for foreign governments. John answers, at this point, bots are their platform. And really, that can be straight up true with or without any Russian influence in any of this. I mean, bots, they're not people, but they are activity, and, they just need to show that they're a place where there's always going to be a consistent amount of activity. But there's more speculation that comes in the form of this tweet from Phil Riggin, who answers to John here, who's saying, I'd say that Jack, the Twitter founder, has at least $800 million in Russian funding to thank for keeping this platform solvent. Well, that's kind of interesting, and it links to a story that basically, it's old, and that should be kept in mind, but what a story it is by the headline. Anyway, this is from the Telegraph, and pointing out the UK paper, of course. Twitter confirms significant round of funding led by Russian investment company. I said this was old, and where's the date line on this? 2011. So, I guess there's only so much you can take away from the fact that it comes from 2011. This was well before any of us thought about Russian influence on Twitter. But I guess if the plan's sophisticated enough and really being driven by the Russian government / oligarchy, it's worth thinking about the possibility that they may have been hatching these plans for some time. Well, here's the story by Amanda Andrews. Again, this is 1 August 2011. While the microblogging site did not outline the size of investment led by the Russian investment company in a blog post, reports put the deal at $400 million plus another $400 million in secondary funding. Twitter plans to use the funding for product development, hiring, and internal expansion. This was, of course, some time ago. Twitter published on the blog, we've come very far in a short time. Now we have an opportunity to expand Twitter's reach with a significant round of funding led by the venture firm DST Global, with the participation of several of our existing investors. So, okay, they got a lot of money. Who is DST Global? The leader of this investment group that put $800 million into Twitter back in 2011. DST Global, owned by internet tycoon Yuri Milner. Yuri, so come on. Milner, have we called this guy's name? I'm not sure. DST Global. Sounds familiar, but it's all tends to sound the same. He made other investments in Facebook, online deal site Groupon, and Zynga, and let's see, is also, I guess, is he the creator, is that what they're saying, of the popular online games Mafia Wars and Farmville, or maybe he invested in those. Okay, and that's Zynga, I guess. Okay. Twitter has grown significantly since it was founded in 2006, but it is unclear how successful it's been in translating its popularity into profit. And let's see, the rest of this article kind of really is just about the viability of Twitter as it was seen in 2011. It was really offered up for the fact that at some point Russian investors lead an $800 million cash infusion into Twitter. And I guess if they still own a significant chunk of it and are still significant backers of it, well, you wouldn't be very likely to see Russian bots or Russian influence erased anytime soon, I would think. As it turns out, other people have given this some thought, and from some strange quarters. I wouldn't necessarily have thought this was up her alley, but apparently Valerie Plame is concerned about this, and there's an article here linked in the responses to 20 committee's initial tweet here to a Vanity Fair piece. Maya Kosoff wrote this, and it's relatively recent, August 24th, 2017. Inside Valerie Plame's quixotic mission to buy Twitter and shut down Trump. Can the ex-spy take away the president's megaphone before he tweets the world into Armageddon? It's not quite the same motivation, but an interesting idea. Certainly, I mean, a little outlandish. I don't think it's really going to happen. But what a strange, it's not somebody I thought who would have been taking the lead in this. And there's no indication anywhere that she suspects that she's displacing Russian, the influence of Russian oligarch money in all of this, because it seems mostly focused on the idea of that if we were the owners of Twitter, then we could make Trump shut up. But it's an interesting side effect to it would be to be able to see just how much influence Russia buys in Twitter. Now, we're getting really close to the end of the show here, but I thought it was interesting. I thought we ought to pick up on these bots and differentiate between American-influenced bots and the Russian stories. But I want to tease one more story. I didn't get to the Joe Arpaio stuff, but we'll pick that up later in the week. One more story that I'll tease and tell you we got to get back to sometime soon is where was this one? This was another thing that came up over the weekend. Why am I not finding this thing so easily? A really interesting callback to a story we did, a long time ago that reminded me of something that I hadn't given any thought to for a really long time. And that is that you remember when we spent some time, I wasn't really clear at the time of exactly why it was important, but we spent some time just to be amazed at the corruption of FIFA, the International Soccer Organization, and the amount of bribes that were moving back and forth to make policy decisions and place tournaments and put the World Cup in places where people who had paid these bribes would be in a position to capitalize on it by, getting concessions contracts or earning the millions of dollars that the competition brings to whatever location it moves to. And that there was this astounding level of international corruption. And I remember, back in my mind, hearing about the guy. I remember it was Chuck Blaze, I think was his name, right? And he was the most astoundingly corrupt guy involved in the American wing of FIFA and the local, or not local, but the continental conferences that make up FIFA. And I remember now he lived in Trump Tower, which I found really kind of interesting and amazing. I mean, he just seemed like such a sleazy guy. It's sort of like it made some sense. But that's coming back into the news again, and I want to prepare everybody for that arrival or re-arrival in the news of FIFA and its corruption. Just remember that we brought that up here a while ago, and I'll get to it. We'll have to save it for another day, exactly why that becomes important again. I just want to throw that out there. And the Arpaio thing. Somebody remind me to get to that tomorrow. And, of course, I also wanted to bring up the international worry about election integrity and Russian interference in the elections of other countries. Did you know, for instance, Kenya has just found itself under order of its own Supreme Court to redo their presidential election. And somebody really clever and speculative has found out that apparently the winning candidate in Kenya is a client of none other than Cambridge Analytica. And they surprised everybody by winning. And now they think something's wrong with the vote. And how creepy is that? And they're not the only ones. Denmark and Sweden, it turns out, have a new program on specifically to counter fake Russian news. And our good friend from Norway, Bjorn, tells us that in his country, they're actually working very hard to prevent any Russian hacking by verifying their own votes and securing their election systems ahead of time as well.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So we definitely thank you for the tip, Bjorn. We're going to have to check in when we've got a little bit more time and weave together all the countries who are that nervous about this. It is amazing, and of course we knew it was coming too, but our Republican representatives here swore themselves to secrecy so they could capitalize on it. Very weird. Wish it hadn't happened. We'll talk more about it.